Welcome again to the webinar. This webinar is on advancing nutrition in Africa. We have a number of partners that are co-hosting this webinar. These are the Zero Hunger Coalition, With the Sun Movement, the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and the Shamba Center for Food and Climate. Thank you very much to the conveners for putting forward this webinar. There is interpretation available from English to French. So if you could go and look at the translation globe on the series of icons at the probably bottom or top of your screen, depending on the type of tools you are using. So there is translation. The African continent continues to face critical challenges in ensuring food security and providing access to safe, nutritious foods for all. Globally, we know that 2.4 billion people, many of them in Africa, are struggling to secure adequate nutrition year-round. And there is an increasing need to shift towards healthier, more balanced diets that are both affordable and accessible to all communities. The recent State of Food Security and Nutrition report, the SOFI report, has indicated that in 2023, 1 in 11 people experienced hunger worldwide. Unfortunately for Africa, this is 1 in 5, much, much higher than other regions. Malabo Declaration in 2025, there is a growing political will and commitment to advance nutrition in the different programs that we have continentally as well as in countries. This is important because we need a strong emphasis on the need for sustainable nutrition financing across sectors, including significant involvement of the private sector to play their part in advancing nutrition on the continent. We would like to build on this momentum for this webinar, and we'll focus on the intersection of agriculture, food systems, and nutrition. It will explore the role of financing, the role of gender inclusion, and policy alignment in transforming food systems to deliver healthy diets and improve nutrition outcomes across the African continent in line with Agenda 2063 that looks to a well-nourished African population. We have a number of distinguished speakers with us today, and we will start first with a framing from Dr. Lawrence Haddad, who is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. He is also on the board of the coalition of the Zero Hunger Coalition. Dr. Haddad does not usually need much introduction because he serves the continent well on multiple ways on the nutrition agenda. Dr. Haddad, over to you.
Thank you, Namukolo. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Great. Well, thank you, Namukolo, and thank you to the organizers, and greetings, everyone. In terms of framing, I mean, Namukolo has done a pretty good job of framing the issues already. Malnutrition rates undernutrition rates are slowly coming down in most places, but most slowly in Africa. Stunting, wasting, anemia. On the other hand, the rates of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, these kinds of manifestations of malnutrition are rapidly increasing, especially in urban areas, but also in rural areas too. So we have a big challenge, and every country has. We often say no country has a monopoly on the problem of malnutrition, and no country has a monopoly on the solutions to it. Everyone's facing malnutrition. It's just different. It just shows itself differently in different contexts. The most important thing is that it's not going down quickly enough. So the question is, how can the post-Malabo agenda do more to capitalize on the seeming political will there is around nutrition? So first of all, I want to say, I thought the existing Malabo Declaration, although it wasn't as explicit about malnutrition or good nutrition as it was around, say, ag productivity, it nevertheless had it did report, the biennial reports did call out and did talk about malnutrition. I'm mindful of the 2022 report, which identified one of GAIN's countries. Well, is a country that GAIN did not have an office in, and it basically said this country's doing pretty well on everything except malnutrition. And so the Minister of Agriculture of that country called me up and said, "I want to meet with you, and I want to know why GAIN doesn't have an office in this country." So we visited, we set an office up, and now I think are working hard to accelerate malnutrition reduction in that country. So the existing declaration did do quite a lot. I think the new post-Malabo effort, the initiative, it can do more because it can move us from productivity to nutrition-sensitive agriculture, and move us from nutrition-sensitive agriculture to nutrition-sensitive food systems. So it's very important. I'll talk a bit more about what that means, Namukolo, later on, if you let me. But just to reiterate, healthy diets is not sufficient to end malnutrition, but it's an absolute necessity to end all forms of malnutrition. There are other things that are important in addition to healthy diets: clean water, clean sanitation, good health care, good parental care. But without a healthy diet, you're not going to get anywhere in trying to reduce malnutrition. And healthy diets are at the core of all forms of malnutrition. They reduce, healthier diets would reduce premature mortality, reduce chronic and acute illness and infection. They would be good for the environment. Healthier diets tend to be lower in emissions. Healthier diets tend to be diverse diets, which tend to be coming from more diverse production systems, which is good for resilience. And we know that better nourished workers lead to better productivity, higher income for themselves, but also for their employers. So healthy diets are really important. Behind every diet is a food system. If the diet is healthy, the food system is likely to be healthy. Back to you, Namukolo.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. Indeed, it's always been good to see how there has been more and more nutrition and diets being included in the CAADP process. And I think having had a results framework that actually had dietary indicators and nutrition has helped indeed to end up with the kind of experience you had with the country that wondered why you were not present in their country. Now it is my great honor to introduce Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, who is the chair of the Zero Hunger Coalition and the African Union's Special Envoy for Food Systems. Dr. Mayaki will provide us a keynote address. And I just want to also recognize the fact that Dr. Mayaki is actually our former director of the AUDA, the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, which is our very own development agency on the continent. Dr. Mayaki, very much an honor to ask you to give us your keynote address. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Namukolo. And let me say that I think Lawrence Haddad has already given the keynote address because he highlighted really the essential points in a very condensed manner, but very precise manner of the problematic that we are facing regarding nutrition. He is a champion in that domain, and his leadership has to be recognized. So I will have 5 quick points. The first one is, before getting to post-Malabo as the last point, I'll go back to Maputo in 2003, where agriculture was highlighted as a priority by African leaders against the intent, the willingness of most of the IFIs at that moment, except FAO, which did help the African Union design CADEP and accompanied the African Union in the implementation of CADEP processes at national and regional level. The focus was on agriculture, the increase of agricultural production. And in 2014, when we moved to CADEP, the phase 2 of CADEP, which is a Malabo declaration, there is already an integration of nutrition in the declaration. And if you look carefully at the Malabo declaration, it says food and nutrition security. And we tend to forget that, but it's 2014. So it's quite remarkable that drawing from the lessons of the implementation of CADEP phase 1, coming from Maputo, nutrition was integrated into CADEP phase 2, which is Malabo, with a declaration of food and nutrition security. And what drove the attention, it was mostly the conclusions of the cost of hunger reports, where policymakers were starting to realize that that cost of hunger had a significant impact on GDP. The level of consciousness of policymakers at that time, before that time, on nutrition was not very high. But when we did realize that not managing the nutrition dimension could have a significant impact on human capital and a cost in terms of points of GDP, then political will started to emerge. And I think it's important to mention it as we go towards post-Malabo. But the second point is that there was the discovery of the fact that in terms of policy making, nutrition was not a sector, but had a multi-sectoral dimension. And our public institutions were not fit for that purpose of multi-sectorality. It used to be centered within health ministries, and it couldn't be only about health ministries. It had to be about all the other ministers which are connected to that, from, as Laurent Haddad was saying, from water to agriculture to environment, etc. So multisectorality became a key issue and a key condition for the successful implementation of nutrition-sensitive policies. So that's my second point. The third point is about financing. We know that in Malabo, the targets of Maputo of 10% of public resources allocated to the sector were reiterated with a goal of 6% of productivity. But the biennial review, as very correctly mentioned by Laurence Haddad, the biennial review showed to us that not many countries were doing well, not only in terms of financing, but in terms of specific indicators regarding nutrition. I don't know if we are talking about the same country that he referred to, but he didn't name. But that country had very good indicators economically, socially, but in terms of nutrition, well, if it is the country I'm also thinking about, in terms of nutrition, we had very bad numbers. And it wasn't good for not only their image, but it was not good. It's not a question of image, but it wasn't good as an indicator of the efficiency of a global public administration system and in terms of achievements in terms of development. So my fourth point is regarding development. More and more, we see policymakers establishing a clear linkage between nutrition and development. That wasn't the case before. Development was left to the planning ministries, the economists, etc. Now, it is no longer the case. Nutrition is at the center of the design of development strategies, the reflection on the implementation of development strategies, and the ownership by policymakers of what nutrition means in order to be translated into development policies. And that has led to a kind of new approach, which has to do with a whole government approach. And that whole government approach coincides with the food systems approach, which is a holistic approach. So it is holistic in terms of methodology, and it is holistic institutionally. And that's where post-Malabo is trying to move towards. A key issue mentioned again by Lawrence Haddad is that globally, let's say the indicators are quite moving in a positive dimension globally, but in Africa, they are not going where the trend is too slow. So if the trend is too slow, it means that we need to accelerate in order to correct the trend. So the central question to post-Malabo will be how we can accelerate on nutrition-sensitive policies in order to target healthy diets, balanced diets, which are affordable and accessible. Evidently, it's not sufficient, but if we can take advantage of a current political will in order to have a nutrition-sensitive approach regarding food systems transformation, then it will be an important step forward, because it will not only be in terms of the content of the policies, but it will have an effect on the resources, the financial resources, which are affected and geared towards this objective. So post-Malabo has clearly laid out the importance of nutrition and the importance of accelerating in that domain. And I will stop here. And as the last point, which is an important one, as the chair of the Zero Hunger Coalition, what the very important comparative advantage that I see is that all of us are an active minority with a common goal, but an active minority which has the power to change the context, and especially in the African continent, by using all the partners, by making sure that all the partners which are around the table, and we know that all the partners have the necessary motivation for that, by having all these partners gathered in order to influence policies and to influence implementation of policies at national and regional level, we play a critical role. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mayaki. Indeed, the CADEP biennial review process is an important aspect of us being able to monitor progress on the continent. Continuing on with this theme of an African perspective, I actually want to first go to Honorable Neema Lugangira. And being a member of parliament, I really want to pick on you first. There's a lot that has been said around accountability and financing already in what both Dr. Haddad and Dr. Mayaki have indicated. So from your parliamentarian's perspective, how can parliamentarians spearhead a more integrated and accountable approach to financing that can actually prioritize nutrition and healthy diets? How do you see that happening from sitting within Parliament? Over to you, Honorable Neema.
Thank you so much, Dr. Namukolo. I must say that I'm very honored and humbled to be here before great people, great leaders who I really admire and look up to. Mayaki, Dr. Haddad, and yourself, Namukolo. So I'm really, really happy to be on the same panel with you guys. In terms of parliamentarians, I think up until now it is clear that there has been insufficient attention on the integration of nutrition and food systems, especially in the broader economic and social development agendas. And the focus has mainly been on food production, unlike being and neglecting the downstream aspects such as nutrition and diet quality. And I think as parliamentarians, we have a role that we can play by using our platforms to advocate and raise awareness and bring to the attention of governments and other key stakeholders on the importance of integrating nutrition, quality of the diets alongside along the entire food systems value chain. But I think it's also very important for organizations such as the ones that we have on this call today and global leaders like yourselves to equip us as members of parliament with the evidence and credible data that we can use in our advocacy, because there's limited data and evidence that is available for MPs in linking food systems and nutrition. And this unfortunately hinders the development and getting to that clear path process. And when we're talking about financing, obviously we have to somehow legislate. Many governments have budgeting for nutrition, and it is the case even in Tanzania. But most of the times we find that these budgets for nutrition are not ring-fenced. So whenever there is a need in other sectors or in other areas, that budget gets shifted. And I think it's important to find ways in which we can ring-fence budgets for nutrition. And to do that, it goes back to the evidence piece. And as parliamentarians, just to conclude, we can champion new laws, and these laws that will ensure that food system not only focuses on production, but also focuses on making sure that we have nutrition sensitive food systems. And by doing so, we will reach to the better diets, quality of diets, and improved livelihood all around. And I think this is one of the reasons why, as parliamentarians, we had set up the African Food Systems Parliamentary Network that hopes and to drive this process. And I'm also very honored that as a member of parliament, I have recently been elected as the co-chair for the Sun Movement EXCOM, which again goes to show the direction in which the world is progressing in recognizing the importance of building that political will. Because at the end of the day, we as politicians need to be able to understand and comprehend these things so that good decisions can be made. Thank you.
I don't want to let go of you just as yet. I know you are headed off to Parliament in a few minutes. So let me ask you another question. And that is, you kept talking about evidence, that you need evidence from researchers. Now, I mean, your positioning in the Sun place, your positioning as a parliamentarian, can you give us an idea, how can we best package such evidence for you to be able to use and be able to tailor, finance tailored solutions that include even empowering small scale farmers in marginalized communities? So how best can we package finance related evidence for Parliament to use in the different African countries? Just briefly, please.
Thank you. I think very quickly, maybe I can take school meals as an example. So if for school meals to be sustainable, it creates an opportunity for smallholder farmers around the community where the school is. So if it's maize or beans or whatever, can either be grown at the school or bought from smallholder farmers in the area. But most families, especially in the rural areas, may not be able to afford to pay for the school meals for their children. So this means that maybe the government needs to subsidize that. But where will the government get the budget to do so when there are other pressing needs in the community? So how are we going to capacitate a local government official or a politician to be able to understand and see that there is value to invest in nutrition, to invest in school meals versus investing in something else? So that is where the criticality of the data comes into play, and showing the kind of the entire scope of the expenses and how it links into even the human capital development, maybe the costs that the government is incurring, costs in medication and things like that. So how to package it all so that when presented to a politician who's a decision maker can see that it actually makes business sense to also invest in nutrition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think continuing with the theme of looking at the African perspective, the next panelist I would like to introduce is Mr. Mathews Mhuru, Deputy Executive Director at the National Food and Nutrition Commission in Zambia. Now, what I want to ask you has to do with the fact that as Africa, we are already experiencing very serious challenges of climate change. And Zambia is just been going through a really bad drought situation. Can you suggest ways in which you are trying to look at addressing the reoccurring drought? Specifically, the question I want you to address is, how is Zambia trying to rebuild resilience in its food systems to ensure long-term nutritional security?
Okay,
over to you, Matthew.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me. So indeed.
Yes, we can hear you quite well.
Great. So Zambia and the region, are experiencing a drought. For Zambia, I think we've not had, this kind of drought in the last 40 years. So this drought has actually resulted into, an energy crisis, as well as also just a food and nutrition crisis. So it has the potential to even derail, the gains that we've made so far in addressing the challenges of malnutrition. And, the amount of money that it will cost us, to rebuild and to get to where we want to, to be, is an estimated, I think, $1 billion so far, just to deal with the hunger, just the food crisis itself. So that has put us in a very terrible situation. Government has had to, pull resources from other ministries. So monies that were meant for different programs have had to be recalled so that we deal with that. But maybe just speaking to how, we are rebuilding, especially from the food system side, to ensure that, we protect the gains that we've made so far. The 2025 national budget, which was just announced by the Minister of Finance in the last 2 weeks, has a central theme that looks at, just addressing, the energy crisis, addressing the food crisis that the drought has brought, because we have about, I think, half the population facing severe, situations of drought and just power crisis as well. Beyond that, what we've done as well from the nutrition side is to ensure that we have very strong food systems strategies, and ensuring also that we make sure we protect the nutrition angle, like ensuring that our food system is very nutrition sensitive, because also there's a risk of the focus going towards production, and the nutrition angle get lost in translation. So with that, we've done quite a number of things. We've aligned policies that are speaking to the food production so that they're nutrition sensitive, as well as also ensuring that our Ministry of Green Economy that is responsible for our weather forecasts and just the forest foods and other aspects of the just the green economy itself are also aligned. We have a very strong political will and just the coordination system in our country, because now issues related to food and nutrition are sitting in the Vice President's office. So our coordination mechanisms are coming all the way from national level to the community level as well. So all those efforts we have put together so that we recover from this drought, and we also just protect the gains that we've made in addressing nutrition in the last few years. And I must mention this, that when you look at the financing, for example, we've noticed that from the global side all the way to national level, there's a lot strong support that is going towards just transforming food systems. So aligning all the nutrition targets that we had and ensuring that they are part of the food systems transformation strategies is one way that we are trying to achieve that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mhuru. You see that these themes within the African context was one theme, and then we also looked at financing as another theme that keeps coming up. I know that both Lawrence Haddad and Dr. Mayaki might leave us quickly. Lawrence, I am building on your earlier comment where you said, yeah, if I could let you come back again. And so addressing that wish, I would like to ask you to address this issue of financing. Has been a difficult one for us for some time on the African continent. But I also know that you are part of this group on food systems countdown to 2030 initiative. So the question that I want to ask you is, within that context of countdown to 2030, how can we bring this element of tracking progress on nutrition financing? Is it possible? I say so because majority of African countries have developed food systems transformation pathways. The whole CADEP post-Malabo agenda is taking on a food systems approach informed by the Africa Common Position on Food Systems. In all these cases, we want to make sure that our food systems address the multiple forms of malnutrition that you spoke about in your remarks. So on the tracking side, is there help coming from the food systems countdown to 2030? What are the things we need to look out for to make sure that those elements are incorporated in the post-Malabo way of doing things. Over to you.
Thank you, Namukolo. Good question. So I think there are a number of things that can trigger transformation or accelerate transformation. I think food system transformation is a difficult thing to do. Food systems is a great way of thinking about the problem of nutrition because it generates so many opportunities to reorientate not just production. We know that agricultural research and development is very focused on the big staples and not enough on pulses, fruits, vegetables, those kinds of foods. It's a way of reorientating food processing. We know that there's too much of a default to milling grains when in fact we're throwing away the best part of the grain. But the technology for preserving whole grain cereals has really progressed in the last 20 years. So we don't have to mill as much as we used to. We can do more fortification on the processing side as well. We know how to do that for smaller and smaller mills all the time. In the market space, we know more about transport and storage and how to prevent food loss, how to minimize unsafe food, and how to create healthy market infrastructure. You know, literally the food that is floors of the markets that are concrete, keeping live animals away from fresh food, these kinds of things. And even in the retail side of things, we know how to tailor foods, nutritious foods, so that lower income people can afford them through sizing and pricing. We know how to stimulate nutritious food purchasing through placement of foods within certain retail environments. And we know about how to market foods. And we're even beginning to get a handle on culture, food cultures. Some of my colleagues are doing some interesting work at GAIN on unlocking the keys to food culture. And they've been doing this in Kenya and Indonesia. And in Kenya, all the people they've been talking to tell them that one of the keys to food culture in Kenya is a sort of an aspiration to emulate the West. If that really is true, that's disastrous, because the West have the highest rates of obesity and overweight and diabetes anywhere in the world. So I think the thing about a food system perspective is that there's so many opportunities. However, it's also quite complicated, and it requires a new set of tools. So we have been working at GAIN on a new set of tools that are going to help policymakers in Africa and everywhere, you know, even in the country I live in the UK, describe their food system, diagnose their food system, and then figure out what to do to make it more likely to promote nutrition. One of the tools is something that has been developed actually by IFAD and the World Bank, called 3FS, which is a budget analysis tool, I think inspired by the Sun work of 5-10 years ago, looking at nutrition budgets. And it's literally going through budgets, thousands and thousands of lines of budget, domestic budgets, government budgets, and tagging them, which is 100% food system, which is 10% food system, and then tagging the outcomes, because food systems affect not just nutrition but lots of other things: climate, jobs, resilience. So it's tagging all of those things. And we at GAIN, we're doing this with we're applying this methodology with governments in 10 countries, 8 of whom are in Africa. So I think that's a part of that's one tool to diagnose, but there are other tools. We're working with Academia 2063.
So
Okay,
we're going to run out of time. It sounds like you've got a whole list of potential tools that can be used, which is actually great, which brings me back to Dr. Mayaki. This webinar is part of a series of webinars dubbed The Road to Kampala, implying this collective of partners really want to influence how we arrive in Kampala, but also how we take off from Kampala using some of these multiple tools that Lawrence has already been describing to us. The question that I want to ask you, because I know you also will need to leave early, is on, we have a collective of partners here that are looking to contribute to ensure that not just the road to Kampala, but the road post-Kampala actually takes us to better developments for our food systems to address diets, nutrition comprehensively, as Lawrence has indicated. Can you recommend to us, from your vantage point within the African Union as our special envoy on food systems, can you recommend how can such a collective of partners engage most effectively with this post-Malabo process beyond Kampala? Over to you.
Thank you. Great question, and 3 quick points. The first one is that the budget is the skeleton of any strategy. You can have magnificent strategy papers. If the budget nationally, at national level, does not reflect what is the content of a strategy document, then I think no implementation and no progress can take place. So the correlation between budgets and strategy papers, strategies, nutritional strategies is extremely important. Now, point number 2, a budget is a negotiation process. You cannot influence a budget ex post after it has been designed. You can influence a budget ex ante whilst a negotiation is taking place between the several parties. And in these parties, the parliamentarians are extremely important, because if the parliamentarians are really dedicated to what objective, they should put their weight ex ante in the design of a budget so that the issues related to nutrition are reflected. Point number 3, all partners acting in that domain need to be aligned. So which means synergies. And synergies where, what does it concretely mean? It means that if a specific national pathway is enhancing a certain number of actions, all partners need to support these actions and not to have parallel initiatives. So, but alignment is important. Point number 4, when I go back to the whole government approach, is that it has, and our Zambian colleague was referring to a fact, or our Tanzanian colleague was referring to a fact that these issues were located at the vice president level. This is extremely important, because that institutional location has a direct consequence on how implementation can take place at governmental level. So, last point, we all know what has to be done. We all know what has to be done. The question is, how do we do it, and how do we influence? And that goes back to your first question. So we ourselves, as partners within this movement, within this process, need to have our own accountability mechanisms. So we need to have indicators showing how well we do in influencing governments, in order not to finance more of the sector, to give more finance to the sector, in order to align. So we need to be accountable. We shouldn't only talk about the accountability of governments and the accountability of regions, public actors. We need our own biennial review, quote and unquote. So that's important, because this is how we will measure how well we do, and this is how we will look at the causes which are impeding us to move where we want to move. All partners should be accountable. I mean, from IFAD to FAO to World Bank, ourselves, the coalition, to GAIN, to all of us. So we need a kind of set of indicators for ourselves on how well we do in order to move from what we know to what has to be done and implemented on the ground. And the final point, we shouldn't evidently forget about the private sector. The private sector plays a critical role. There are more and more African finance institutions which are sensitive to the issue of nutrition. And we need to provide them with the necessary arguments so that they increase their portfolio in that domain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mayaki. Yeah, so we've talked a lot around the theme of financing, that the budgets need to be in place ahead of implementation, but then there should be specific things that ought to be addressed in the particular strategy so that you can actually be able to budget for something that is actually there. Now, I want to move on to our next speaker, who will be Ms. Tendai Gunda, the regional representative for the Sun Movement Secretariat. Tendai, the work that you are doing is very important to developing coherence even across countries to make sure that we can have better nutrition outcomes. Now, with the Malabo Declaration's deadline approaching, and given the Sun Movement's central role in promoting nutrition-sensitive policies, and having heard what has already been said, that things need to be in the strategy for parliamentarians to be able to budget for them, so things really have to be aligned. What are the critical areas where you believe African governments should focus their efforts to achieve sustainable, impactful nutrition outcomes in the coming decade? Because these are the areas that we should be ensuring that are included in our strategies, and that beyond that, they are actually budgeted for. So what are those critical areas you believe African governments should focus on in the next 10 years? Over to you, Tendai.
Thank you very much, Namukolo. Mathews, Neema, Dr. Haddad, and Dr. Mayaki, thank you very much. I'm really going to springboard from what Dr. Mayaki has just talked about, because that's one of the very critical areas, which is, focusing on alignment. And for us to align well across stakeholders, across sectors, we need to have an entity with a high convening power that has the capacity to convene stakeholders and facilitate mutual accountability. So basically, again, of course, the tool that Dr. Mayaki talked about on mutual accountability, holding each other to account, is something that's very important. So really, what really comes to the center of that, let us embrace country-led delivery of a multi-sectoral approach that embraces the foods of a multi-sectoral approach, so that we can effectively deliver a systems approach to ending all forms of malnutrition. Of course, as the Sun Movement, we are going we appreciate and acknowledge that for us to deliver effectively on nutrition, we need to make sure nutrition is well embedded across the different systems. And that also means that our nutrition strategies should be adequately incorporated in our national development plans and costed. That has already been discussed. And we need to definitely engage our parliamentarians effectively. So because they are the policymakers, they are the ones who actually debate on our budgets. That's why, of course, as Anglophone Africa, we are very proud that we've got Neema sitting on the EXCOM or as the co-chairperson of the Sun Movement Executive Committee, because that's already showing our commitment to really move further in engaging parliamentarians, because for us to translate the very high level commitment that we have in Africa, we are privileged because we've got that very high level commitment to ending all forms of malnutrition in Africa. What is lacking is the translation of that commitment to financing and actual action that is not fragmented. So this comes back to the alignment issue that Dr. Mayaki has talked about. And you need somebody with the convening power to effectively coordinate and ensure that alignment. So one of the key issues is definitely ensure leadership, so that we have leadership that has convening power, so that actions are adequately aligned and we actually deliver cost-effective interventions. And the second one is definitely to really push to have domestic financing for all our nutrition actions through our national development plans. It's very challenging. I think we're all aware that the global aid space is really shrinking, and we really need to start looking at ways of tackling our problems on our own and financing them as Africa. So those are some of the key issues that I think we really need to be focusing on. But that really also means we need to continue strengthening our systems and deliberately incorporating nutrition into these systems. If we say it as a word, put indicators to measure it, but don't plan and finance the actions to deliver, we'll continue to have all these other indicators thriving and nutrition suffering. So we need to be very deliberate in our efforts to ensure that nutrition is actually genuinely embedded, not only at outcome level, not only at the defining of objectives, etc., but in true actions, which means we need to maybe look at some of the actions with a slightly different lens so that nutrition is incorporated, and we need to cost it, we need to budget for it, and we need to fund it so that we actually get those results. So I think, of course, in the interest of time, those are the most fundamental issues that we need to see there.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, a lot of things that will need to be financed, right? And so that brings me nicely to the next speaker that I would like to call upon, and this is Mr. George Ouma, who coordinates the African Leaders for Nutrition initiative at the African Development Bank. George, you have heard all this different angles of we need strategies. We have a framework within CADEP, the Africa Common Position. The Sun Movement also provides us a framework through which to address both our food systems transformation, but specifically towards better diets and nutrition. Now there is the African Leaders for Nutrition initiative. And you've been doing some work for some time, including working on the Africa Nutrition Accountability Scorecard. And accountability has already come up several times. So the question that I want you to address is, what role can innovated financing such as blended finance or impact investment play in closing this financing gap in nutrition that we have already been talking about for a while now? Over to you, George. Is George with us?
Thank you, Namukolo. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And I want to, share my gratitude with the previous speakers, Dr. Haddad, Dr. Mayaki, Gunda, and Mathews, for some of the critical areas that they have highlighted, because that speaks to the critical elements that I want to share. Now, this particular question, Namukolo, is heavy because it has blended financing, it has, impact investment, and these are quite, heavy areas. But I want to pick specific areas to help respond to your question on how really we can be able to ensure that these aspects or elements of financing can actually get us to, where we want to be. And to really, highlight the role that these elements play, three things that I want to speak to. One is, risk mitigation. And I think many a times we look at certain aspects of what is able to help, different, financiers or investors to, come into nutrition financing. And what really makes or becomes a challenge is the risk that is perceived. And I want to refer to the private sector engagement. Blended financing can actually help, ensure that we cement the public-private investment and, public funds such as grants or concessional loans. And I am putting this in perspective, Namukolo, because I work for the African Development Bank, and concessional loans are a critical aspect of financing. And if you look at grants and concessional loans, these are used to de-risk projects and make them more attractive to private investors. And if we are going to look at what role that the blended financing can play, is one of them is to ensure that we can de-risk some of these investments so that we can be able to attract, the institutions, the corporations, the donors, and the institutions that can actually put, resources on the table to finance nutrition. And just to, help put this across, is this kind of, de-risking can actually help us overcome the perceived risks, high risk of investing in nutrition-related sector. And, sectors that attract, many of our critical players in the nutrition ecosystem would be, agriculture, the food system, and the health infrastructure, which are actually critical in advancing nutrition agenda. The second aspect that I would like to, put on the table is leveraging capital. Using public funds to leverage, private sector capitals. Blended finances have actually helped to significantly increase, the total investment in nutrition. For instance, we always say, this every dollar invest is actually $16 in return. And in many a times, every dollar of public funding could actually attract several dollars in private investment, multiplying impact on nutrition program. This model has been appreciated by the business sector, the profit-making, acumen. And I think it's time for us to start, leveraging on the capital that we have and making sure that we can actually multiply the resources that is already available for us to be able to pull enough financing. And finally, when you're looking at financing high impact projects, blended financing can actually allow different governments and developing partners to channel investment into areas that have high social return. But, it might be less profitable in the short term, but the private sector, such as community nutrition programs, maternal and child health programs, fortified food, can actually give us the highest return in the long term. Over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, George. I mean, you brought in the element of risks. And one of the big risks that we often deal with is by getting into programs and strategies that then leave out women as an important stakeholder for delivering nutrition, which I would like now to take to the next speaker, which is Ms. Kyoko Shibata Okamura, Senior Nutrition Specialist at the World Bank. Ms. Kyoko, the World Bank has this investment framework for nutrition, and that in that framework, you also delve into issues around gender, climate, and malnutrition nexus. Now, in the context of the risks that we face from a warming climate, how can we better ensure that nutrition and food systems policy, that within these food systems policies, women as a critical actor in household nutrition are empowered to contribute and to benefit from sustainable solutions. And I bet this can only happen if there is targeted financing that goes to gender issues. Could you give us your insights on this, Ms. Kyoko? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to speak at this forum. I'm really honored to be here with other distinguished speakers. And I know that even though we did the very rigorous evidence synthesis on nutrition interventions in different sectors through the new investment framework for nutrition that was just published 2 weeks ago, I know living in Africa and working there for several years, I recognize that these evidence synthesis do not do justice to this very dynamic and diverse continent. But I would like to try to pick out a few salient issues to respond to your question. Oh, by the way, the investment framework new analysis actually came up with the investment return of nutrition interventions of $23 per $1 invested. So it's now not $16, but $23. So please use that number for your advocacy and messaging. It's quite important. Now, the investment framework, the updated investment framework has a whole dedicated chapter on climate, nutrition, and gender. So we really value and I think this is a critical area that we need to really start focusing on. And I have 3 points to make. First of all, women bear much of the burden of climate change, as we all know. And there's emerging evidence, for example, that heat exposure, for example, in pregnancy increases the risk of low birth weight by 25%. And by 2050, 1.4 billion women and children will face increased iron deficiency risk due to climate change mediated reductions in iron supply. So these are serious the situations, especially affecting women and children. Now, solutions. Women represent 40% of agricultural labor force in developing countries, and they play a central role in the current food systems. They must be part of the solutions, but women have more limited ability to access information, land and capital ownership, and agricultural inputs to build their resilience to climate impacts. We need deliberate women-centered climate investments based on locally built adaptation measures. If we have those measures in place and with the finance and implementation platforms, this can generate better and more equitable returns of investments. On the mitigation side, food supply chains contribute to almost 1/3 of global GHG emissions. There are actions that generate climate and nutrition co-benefits. For example, this is a very, my favorite classic example. If we invest in promotion of breastfeeding, this should be not only the best buy intervention for health of the mothers and children, but also this can be considered a cost-effective carbon offset investment because we know that commercial milk formula has high carbon and water footprints. So why do we not consider this as a best buy intervention for both people, women and children, and the planet? We have been talking about this, but we have not done this as an investment. Finally, I'm coming to financing. Many speakers already touched on financing. There are many important elements that I would love to pick out if there was more time, but let me focus on the climate financing. Despite a huge increase in climate financing for the past several years, it's now amounting to $1.3 trillion. However, only 4.3% of climate funds currently target the agri-food sector, of which nutrition is a only very small fraction. However, we think also that there are already existing climate funds that are increasingly targeting food security, nutrition, and women intersectorally. So those, the funding instruments can actually offer potential avenues to bring finance and resources to activities that would generate environment and nutrition co-benefits with gender lens. I think it is time to be part of the negotiation at this table with the climate, food, food system, agriculture stakeholders with concrete menu of options for nutrition improvement and leverage these resources for better outcomes and investment returns for nutrition for women and children.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like now to go to Q&A. So participants, please, if you have any questions, do add them in Q&A. There's also already some questions that have come up. I see that Lawrence is still with us. Am I correct, Lawrence? Show me that you are still with us by coming online. Ah, great. So I want to pass this particular question to you, because I know you spend quite a big chunk of your life crunching through numbers for the African continent. The question that has been asked is, how much progress has been made in achieving the goal of doubling agricultural productivity by 2025? What improvements have been made in addressing child undernutrition? And has the goal of reducing stunting to 10% and underweight to 5% been met? This is a multi-barreled question. The additional bit is, what has been the impact of efforts to improve the inclusion of women and youth in agriculture value chains, particularly in the goal of creating job opportunities for at least 30% of youth? So this is really delving into the CAADP Malabo goals. You can address them more specifically or generally, I think, from the numbers that we have from the Global Nutrition Report. Can I pass that question on to you?
I'm not as up to date as I used to be, but I know that stunting reduction has been slow in sub-Saharan Africa, and even countries as progressive as Kenya and Rwanda still have stunting rates that are stubbornly high. So it's a tough job to bring down stunting. I think we say the rule of thumb is if you can reduce stunting rates by 1 percentage point per year, that's about par for the course. But some countries have reduced it by 2% per year. And that's certainly Rwanda's goal right now, is to reduce it by 2 to 3% per year from its current rate of about 32%. And I think they stand a good shot of at least getting to 2%. So it's possible. You know, you have to have everything lined up, but it's possible. In terms of wasting, that seems to be very stubbornly stuck in some countries, and it's hard to know what that's due to. Is it due to poor sanitary environment? Is it due to complex conflict or complex emergencies that don't go away? It's hard to know what that's about. I think in terms of ag productivity, we know that it hasn't increased much in sub-Saharan Africa, and where it has increased, it's increased in the staple foods, not in the more nutritious, nutrient-dense foods, because less ag R&D has been spent on it. And when it comes to women in value chains, I think there's some progress. The MasterCard Foundation, working with AGRA and others, has been pioneering, leading the way, trying to get women, trying to give support to women MSME leaders, but they face big challenges. Women find it hard to get access to finance, hard to get access to innovation, hard to get access to networks. So it's very difficult. Some countries, it's very difficult for women to get bank accounts. So we're up against a big sort of cultural barrier when it comes to women in business, but there is progress. And I think the challenge for us all is to find those points of light and to really use them as inspiration for everyone else. Back to you.
Thank you very much. We have a question on how does private sector contribute? I think it's how can private sector contribute better in terms of fighting hunger and malnutrition in African countries. I'm going to ask any one of the panelists to put up your hand so that I can tell who wants to address this. Tendai, maybe you? Is Tendai still with us?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yes, so how can private sector contribute better to nutrition?
Okay, so I think there are various ways that the private sector can definitely contribute to nutrition. The Sun Business Network, for example, they are coming up with very great innovations. So we would encourage the private sector to take a position in any space within the food system and actually align with the national agenda to end all forms of malnutrition and to play their part, which would mean innovation, coming up with innovative, safe, affordable, highly nutritious food products, facilitating the movement of food in a safe way, preserving food, etc. And of course, partnering with governments in a shared value approach, where we encourage businesses to invest in nutrition, the different aspects. I think there are lots of different areas to actually invest in. So there's a lot that private sector can do, but they really need to start having conversations with people in academia, with people in practice, so that they can identify maybe innovations that have been tested by the academia and market them and create a food business or nutrition business out of that, so that there's a shared value. So in summary, I think those are some of the very important things that definitely the private sector can contribute. And for those enterprises that are thriving, it will be worthwhile for them to also, through the shared value approach, contribute financially or in kind or in technical assistance to the nutrition efforts that the country is trying to embark upon. Thank you.
Namukolo, can I come in on this one? Because Namukolo, can you hear me?
Dear Mr. Ouma, we can hear you. You can please also answer to this question if you would like.
Okay, so I saw the question on the chat, and it's asking, how does private sector contribution be better embraced? I think the question is asking, how can we be able to bring the private sector on board to help us, fight hunger and malnutrition in the African continent? And I think a bit of some of the few aspects that I highlighted. One would be, we need to strengthen our public-private sector partnership. And I think even in the post-Malabo going forward, this is the area that really I would really put on the table for the nutrition ecosystem, the food system, transformers to be able to really look at in terms of bringing really strongly the private sector and making sure that we can build that partnership with the private sector. That way we can be able to be aligned in terms of, strategies, in terms of opportunities and resources that is available. And I think the last bit of private sector is the people, public-private sector with the people, making sure that the engagement with private sector and the people is aligned with the engagement of private and the public. Because if the four are in tune, then we are able to see the importance of private sector in the middle of what happens between what services the government provide, what policies the government provide, and the realization and the benefits of those policies and services to the people. Because with that, we are able to make sure that the alignment is across the board, from the provider and the makers of policies to the people who are going to receive them. The other aspect would be the co-investment in the nutrition program. I think it's time for us to look at the opportunities of making sure that governments can encourage private sector to co-invest in public nutrition initiatives. You know, there are examples that are already happening. For example, school feeding program. The bank has just, rolled out a unique, financing model where the bank lends countries, and the bank opens the opportunity for partners, and this could be philanthropies, could be private sector. We also work with the private sector to actually grant countries based on the lending mechanism that is available. So that unique model to ensure that the public can be able to co-invest with the private sector is an impetus to bringing the private sector to embrace the fight against malnutrition. And finally, let's start thinking, and this is based on microfinancing model. How do we ensure that we are able to develop and model nutrition for focused microfinances? And this is looking at how microfinance institutions that provide small loans or financial services to entrepreneurs or businesses in the nutrition sector. And I want to underline the nutrition sector, because that is one way of making sure that you can be able to provide impetus for private sector, for microfinance institutions to actually venture into the nutrition sector and be able to ensure that those investments are particularly social, high social impact investment that then translates to better nutrition outcome. And I think the final one is the ease of collaboration that I think has been talked about by different speakers. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ms. Kyoko, your hand is up. You want to add to the private sector issue as well?
Yes, I think we have a lot to talk about in this space. What I would like to also flag is something that we tend not to talk explicitly about in the context of nutrition financing is the untapped resources from the ESG investments and other investments from the asset management entities. They are investing in something. We have not been able to really tap into that resources to actually, gear that resources towards nutrition outcomes. I know that less than 10% of the current ESG investments are actually allocated to agri-food sector, and nutrition is only a small part of that, less than 10%. We can do a lot more to actually work with investors to shift that, the resources towards better nutrition outcomes.
Thank you very much. There is a question that has come in. It says it was mentioned that in Kenya, imitating the dietary patterns of Western countries is seen as a key factor in nutritional motivation. In this context, I would like to know if overnutrition is being included as one of the indicators measured, as are there plans to prevent it? I'm not sure who I can pass that on to. If there is somebody in the panel or amongst the organizers that works in the Kenyan context, I know you are able to add something there. Please put up your hand and I will give you a chance to speak. Just for me, I know that there is concern in Kenya about overweight and obesity and that there are efforts to actually try and address that, particularly with complementary feeding in children, but also in the way in which school feeding is being organized, is to try and avoid that. There has been some work that is looking at nutrient profiling, and the idea is to make sure that in the labeling that there are health considerations to prevent overweight and obesity as well. So I think there are efforts. I'm looking and I don't see a hand up. If somebody in the amongst participants is able to add information there, please do add it to the chat. I have been told that there is one more question that says, considering challenges of the continent in implementing Western-style healthcare systems, the person asking the question would like to hear the panelists' thought on the food as medicine approach. Could an intersection of a food and a health systems approach with food at the center play a role in the post-Kampala intervention? I believe Lawrence has provided an answer in the chat. Francine, can I pounce on you and ask you if you could provide if you can read the answer that Lawrence has put in the chat, please, on that one. And then maybe while you are organizing yourself, I will go to another question. There was a comment, not a question, that says, we appreciate the Malabo initiative, but a lot more needs to be done in terms of practical solutions to managing post-harvest losses, especially among smallholder farmers in Africa. Thank you very much. Indeed, post-harvest losses are an important issue, and there is indeed some address in the post-Malabo strategy to actually address this. Is there anybody on the panel that might be able to add additional information there? Okay, so post-harvest is an area that definitely is getting attention. I am aware of there being a section in the agenda that will actually address that. The other question that has come through is one that kind of its relevance is a little bit not clear, but I will read the question. The price of charcoal in Uganda has more than doubled in price the last 2 months due to government legislation. How is this assisting vulnerable people? Yeah, charcoal has its own other issues. So can I ask Ms. Kyoko, are you able to address this question from perhaps a sustainable energy perspective?
Okay, I don't know whether I can have a pinpointed the response to this particular question, but as the World Bank, we are starting to look into the coherence in fiscal policies. For example, if we are looking at the fiscal space, agriculture sector has put a lot of public support, including subsidies and trade policies, etc., into agri-food sector. It is estimated to be $600 billion to $800 billion per year going into public subsidies for agriculture sector. On the other hand, we are trying to tax, sugar sweetened beverages, for example, to reduce the consumption of sugar sweetened beverages. When the agriculture subsidies are going, so much of that is going to sugar production. Right, so we are in that way. We are really looking into the coherence of policy space and fiscal measures to be able to optimize the fiscal the policies and strategies to be coherently improving the economies, the people's health and nutrition, as well as climate. I think that requires a lot of analytical work and economic assessments to come up with a rationale for shifting the policy, the package, towards something more optimized for different the benefits, which I think is really important for all the governments to think about, and charcoal may be one of those. And we know also that, for example, the agriculture sector spends a lot of resources for the fertilizers, right? But are we actually really getting into this fiscal coherence of looking at the expenses on those different aspects of the agri-food and agri-food systems and sustainable production and healthier diets altogether? I think if we do that, that a lot of government's public subsidies and public support policies can be increasing the net benefit of the spending for longer term people's health, sustainability, and economies.
Yes, thank you very much. Tendai, I would like to ask you the following question. What role can the Sun movement play in facilitating partnerships, especially to ensure long-term impact on resilience of food systems?
Sorry, thank you for that question. So yeah, so the Sun movement, as you might be aware, we really work to try and bring the different stakeholders together towards one common goal, which is to end all forms of malnutrition. And private sector is one of our most critical partners that we have, that we see as critical to moving this agenda forward. So the first thing we need to do, or we are doing, is to convene and connect. So basically, the Sun movement works as a platform to bring together public and private stakeholders to facilitate dialogue and foster partnerships. The public-private partnerships that were mentioned earlier by George, and trying to have a win-win solutions where, of course, there's shared value and private sector contributes to nutrition whilst also benefiting from the profits associated with it. And another thing that we do with the private sector is to facilitate knowledge sharing. We have hosted various peer-to-peer exchanges across different entities in the private sector, or the private sector networks within the region and across with other regions for the different private sector entities within the continent to share ideas of how they can build businesses around nutrition and partner with their respective governments and other Sun networks in their countries. We also do a lot of advocacy to facilitate alignment. I think that's one of the biggest issues. I think it's very clear that there's a big tension when we look at nutrition in practice and some entities in the private sector. So we do also do a lot of advocacy and to facilitate alignment, where in one instance, we're looking at increased investment in nutrition for both the public and private sectors. But we also work to align private sector efforts with national priorities and to support some of the highly polarizing issues that have created lots of tensions within the nutrition space, especially issues around marketing. We've been engaging the private sector for them to assist in positive marketing of healthy, nutritious foods or healthier food choices and options. by providing healthier food choices and options. So that's how the Sun Movement has been engaging with the private sector, and we're really looking at expanding on this and increasing our engagement with the private sector so that we have more meaningful engagement and contribution to the nutrition agenda by the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tendai. I would like to pass the next question to Mr. Mathews Mhuru. Earlier, you spoke to us about the drought that is ongoing in Zambia. Now, I know that the Zambia food-based dietary guidelines is trying to respond to the needs for nutritional security by paying attention to traditional and indigenous foods to improve resilience. Are there specific programs focused on drought-resistant crops and or irrigation improvements to try and address this kind of drought and presumably future droughts as well? Over to you, Mr. Mathews.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can still hear me. Yes. Yeah, so our efforts, just to transform our food systems in the country, and of course, I had indicated earlier that alignment of strategies, alignment of policies is really key. So I'm glad that Zambia is one of the countries that, has the food-based dietary guidelines in place. And one of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes when you develop food-based dietary guidelines, you would have your food groups listed there, and you would have probably priority interventions that you would need because, of course, the food-based dietary guidelines are an evidence-based, system that would allow you to know what the focus would be in terms of food consumption, in terms of healthy diets, and also just guiding the public on what they should consume and what they should probably reduce or stop consuming. So for Zambia, one of the things that we've done is that with our food-based dietary guidelines, we've tried to bring them closer to the public by developing the consumer guides. So with the consumer guides, there are very easy models that, would make it easy for a family to know, the quantities, to know what to consume, and also incorporate the locally available, foods that would be in different food groups. So for example, if from the eastern region of the country, people would eat certain insects that are high in protein, then our food-based dietary guidelines would, encourage consumption of those because we would want people to have access to healthy and nutritious diets, and especially, foods that are within their region. So we have quite a lot of efforts that we are making with our food systems approach. So bringing closer research institutions so that we work together and we get some guidance on, drought-resistant crops that would belong to certain food groups. So Zambia, maize is the staple, but of course, I think we're trying to change this situation so that people, have other, sources of the starch that, could replace maize, or that is more drought resistance, because sometimes also maize requires quite a longer rainy season, which we are not seeing nowadays. So production of certain foods that might require less of water and could grow in these seasons is something that we are trying to do. So we have brought research institutions such as ZARI in Zambia. We have we have an institution that is helping us with research. We have other institutions also that are working with consumers so that, we do not just end up with policies or recommendations that will not be used by smallholder farmers and by households. So also just yesterday was World Food Day. So we had our Republican vice president, just championing consumption of local as well as also just locally available foods as part of our direction or campaigns that will help us promote consumption of such kind of food. So, but otherwise, I think for us as Zambia, we have all these drought-related, drought-resistant crops. We also have, efforts that the government is trying to make now that will promote more of irrigation in our food production, unlike, the rain dependence that we've seen over the years that has put us in a situation that becomes very costly should just the climate change affect us negatively. So quite a number of efforts are happening. Yes, for time's sake, I hand over the mic.
Thank you very much. I think people can actually look up the food-based dietary guidelines of Zambia. I find it interesting that they have included traditional foods in there as well, which is helpful for resilience. I think we have come to the end of our webinar. I think there's a number of things that have emerged. Definitely from an Africa perspective, we do have multiple challenges that we are facing. There's climate, we have issues around programs needing to be more comprehensive to address food systems transformation, ensure that diets and better nutrition are part of that complexity and that they are addressed adequately. We have been told that strategies are important and that they are important in that they inform what could be budgeted for, and then also that the budgets need to really come in and ensure that the things that we put in our national strategies are adequately budgeted for. We then spoke about bundled financing options. The World Bank and the African Development Bank have spoke to some models to this, and I encourage participants to reach out to both stakeholders where you need details of areas that they have already tried. We had Honorable Neema, our parliamentarian, who has also indicated the importance of packaging evidence for parliamentarians to be able to inform the decisions that they actually make. And then, of course, gender is an extremely important aspect of delivering on nutrition. And this is an area that also requires attention as we budget in programs. We should not only mention women, but also have specific financing mechanisms that are addressed to that. So on that, I would like to say thank you very much, and also hope that the group, our hosting partnerships have got information that they can pick up on, inform other webinars that are coming in this series of On the Road to Kampala. And on that, I would like to say thank you very much to all our panelists and our speakers, and thank you to the participants that have stayed with us right through till the end. Thank you very much and goodbye, and I hope everybody is going to keep going to Kampala and keep actually really challenging us to make sure we can deliver better for the continent. Thank you.